Hello everyone, welcome to Craft of the Draft. I'm Jonty Ralphsmith here with Darren Parkin from the Unplugged podcast. We're going to be delving into his deep suite of VFL knowledge, looking at some young prospects who could be of assistance to AFL clubs this year, players who have performed very, very strongly at VFL level. Darren?
Yeah, and we'll also take a look at a couple of sides at opposite ends of the spectrum. The West Coast Eagles, who are building from the bottom, we'll have a look at their draft strategy, and also the Western Bulldogs, who are either contending or very close to contending. So what do they need to do to close that gap on some of those sides around them?
I'm joined by Darren Parkin from the Unplugged podcast. You do lots of VFL commentary, Darren, and that's going to be the flavour of this episode. So tell us a little bit about your sort of knowledge and credentials in that area before we do dive right into all things young VFL footballers.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of obviously mixing a lot of the Coates Talent League stuff with VFL, and there's obviously a crossover between that. There's a lot of names that we've seen. You know, one of the players that we're going to talk about on our list, Jackson Voss. I mean, I sort of tracked his progress back through the Coates Talent League, and then you see those guys who don't get those opportunities in their draft year, who then, you know, they might be looking for other aspects of their game in terms of maturity, who then go into the VFL. Obviously, you see a lot of AFL players that aren't necessarily getting games that could be picked off by other clubs during trade period, and it's a really fascinating competition, and it's fascinating to see what they're going to do with it going forward, the VFL, whether it goes back to what it used to be and there's a standalone AFL reserves competition. Because obviously you're getting less and less alignments now. St Kilda breaking from Sandringham, it really only leaves Melbourne with Casey and Hawthorn with Box Hill. So that there's not a lot else in terms of that. But yeah, it's been a tremendous, particularly with the birth of the mid-season draft in recent times, picking up those mature players that can have an influence immediately. We've seen so many of those examples, Noble, Max Hall, etc. in recent times. So.
Well, I think the average age of VFL players who get drafted is 23.7 years old. So yeah, you generally, if you're not getting drafted out of the Coates Talent League, you're applying your trade for a few years in the VFL and showing what you're able to do and showing that you're able to match it against men with your skill set. So it's an interesting space like you talk about. And I think there's a fair few prospects in the VFL this year who have got some AFL attributes. So we'll go through a few of them. The Fothergill Round Mitchell medal race is wide open this year. That's awarded to the best emerging talent aged 23 or under. And the last 18 winners of that have gone on to play in the AFL, Sam Davidson being the most recent winner last year. He's obviously out of Richmond's very strong VFL program and now playing for the Western Bulldogs. But we'll start with a couple of Richmond VFL players. Harry Scott, I had a chat to Richmond coach Jake Batchelor about him, who lauded him as being one of the competition's best young players across the last 10 to 12 weeks. He's really found a spot in the midfield. Richmond's AFL listed midfield is obviously a little bit depleted with injury, so that's opened up an opportunity for the Gippslander, or the former Gippsland Power product, and he's been able to grab it with both hands.
Yeah, another one that we saw a little bit of in his early days as a youngster, and you want players to thrive when given that opportunity. So when Richmond might have had a full complement of players available, he would have been a bits and pieces option for them through the middle. But the adversity means that they've had to throw him in. He's shown he can handle that in a more senior sense. He's timed his run beautifully over the last 3 months, obviously leading into the back end of the season. So, he's obviously under the Tigers' nose, and they're going to have a lot of opportunities again when it comes to the draft. But certainly available to a lot of other sides, and he's handled that. That step up in responsibility well.
Just to finish on Harry Scott, you talked about the fact he was a bits and pieces player earlier in the year, and he actually came out of the side for a period of time because it was seen that his stoppage craft was his real strength, but he was pushed out to a wing and was able to really show his running power, and word is that it was comparable to AFL wingers. So that shows that he's got that level of versatility, and I think you need that in the modern game. We know how important running is.
And it shows how much they'll thrive if you get up into that ultra-professional environment too. If they've shown that they can demonstrate that capacity to, work really hard, if you're getting into that, that harder running caper, that they're, they might even rise to another level as a player as a result. So.
Massimo Razzo, no doubt when you've commentated the Tigers VFL this year, he'd be a favourite of yours. He's a real live wire, energetic up forward, straight out of the Western Jets. Probably didn't have the consistency last year at the Western Jets that he himself has spoken about, I think. And the Western Jets aren't naturally or consistently one of the stronger Coates League programs. So perhaps there's a deeper small forward starved of opportunities, but he's so clean inside 50 and pretty good for a goal or two per game, which had him right there or thereabouts on mid-season draft radars.
And only 1 year out of the coach system as well. He only turned 19 in about round 4 or something of this year. So he's still young enough that there's so much upside in him. And, he's proven to be a headache for opposition coaches. And, he's another one who I think if you got him into a really structured AFL environment would have an influence straight away. We've seen small forwards be pretty popular in the draft of recent times. And I think that's going to be the case again.
And I think this guy, Nick Watson, has shown that height doesn't matter. 171 centimetres, Massimo Razzo is, and that certainly hasn't affected him at all. We'll move on to a couple of Frankston Dolphins. How good is it, firstly, Darren, to see them back in the top 4, kicking around with some success? Yeah,
I mean, the last couple of years, they've shown signs of that. They lost so many close games over the last couple of years where they'd surrender sort of 3-goal, three-quarter time leads, get beaten by less than a goal. I think last year there was 3 weeks in a row where they lost by 2, 3, and 6. So you sort of felt that they were on the cusp of getting that all together. And it's great to see them doing that. The improvement in them, the improvement in Coburg, who obviously have had a really rough time of it over recent years, has been really pleasing.
Absolutely. Jackson Voss and Tom Myers, the two seen as the strongest draft prospects out of the Frankston Dolphins, and particularly Jackson Voss getting some really genuine interest now. So he's a defender, really courageous in the air, and he's got a really long penetrating left foot kick. How have you seen his development? I think you said off the top, I'm not sure if it was on air or off air, that he's one that you've really tracked probably since his 18th year at the Sandringham Dragons.
Yeah, that's right. There was a lot of talk around then about whether he would be a very late or rookie pick. That obviously he's now been plying his trade in the VFL for a little while. He has got better in that environment, and there are late maturers, and he is potentially one of those. You mentioned Myers. He's right on that age average that you spoke about. I think he's 23 in 4 months or something like that. So he's probably in that sweet spot in his career too. So I'd be stunned if both of those guys, not early, but they'll find their way onto a list, I think.
Hopefully, I think the good thing with Myers is probably more so than Voss, and you can disagree with me, but he's done it for a number of years now. Myers, he's established himself at VFL level. When he was at the Sandringham Zebras, I think he was the highest finishing VFL player in the VFL Best and Fairest. So that highlights how well he's played there, and then gone across to Frankston and taken a midfield opportunity with both hands, and also spent some time off half back. The only player on this list who got a state combine invite to this point, and we know there are sometimes some late additions, is Ty Hayes, who fractured his fibula, unfortunately. So his season ended prematurely a couple of weeks ago in a marking contest in a match against Coburg. But as a winger up at Southport, he's really impressed with his piercing kicking. Out of the quaffle, really impressed some people around Southport, and it's a good place to be on the wing at Southport, because he's been able to learn off a couple of really strong players in Mick Manteet and Jackson Edwards, who are both quite experienced.
Yeah, nephew of Lenny.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a lot of famous Hayes around in the AFL system, but he's one who, and Southport are super consistent across their VFL landscape, and continually providing really strong talent that's going through the Queensland system as well. So he's a guy that I would anticipate and would be on quite a few clubs' radars. You mentioned Myers as well, with his ability to do it in a system previously at Sandringham, where I would argue that the VFL quality around him wasn't the strongest. Obviously, they had a lot of AFL feeder players, but he was clearly each week the standout amongst those VFL options. And I think Hayes probably slightly different setup in that Southport have had probably a better system around him. But he's been able to thrive in that, which is a really good indication of what he might do in the system.
And I think with Hayes, it's probably more a case of AFL attributes that he's shown, things like speed, things like ball use. It hasn't necessarily been the consistency. He probably averages only the 15, 16 touches, but his discipline running those wings is what's really impressed. Whereas you look at someone like a Harry Scott, whose output has probably been greater, averaging the 25-plus disposals per game, particularly in the last couple of months. You talked about Coburg charging up the ladder as well. Heartbreaking in the last round that Williamstown beat Richmond rather, and took that final spot away from them. But Joel Trudgeon is one who's taken his game to the next level under coach Jamie Cassidy-McNamara this year.
Yeah, saw them in their very first game of the season when they played Essendon at the Hangar.
Yeah.
And he was one who stood out amongst that. That was a game they probably should have won in many respects. And, you know, it is good to see. It's obviously a shame for Coburg, but obviously Williamstown in their own right as a a standalone entity and a powerful club, earning those opportunities. But yeah, he's another one who has got better as the year's gone on. And you raised an interesting point before about the consistency of some players versus the untapped upside, and you wonder whether recruiters are looking at it thinking, this guy's bomb-proof, we could get him in, he'll be a solid 18 to 20 possessions a week player, or this guy we think has a couple of match-winning attributes that, we haven't always found them, but maybe you'd be more inclined to go for that risk.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be interesting with Joel Trudgeon. I think he's one that definitely has that really consistent output, but how often do you see those high possession winners out of the VFL get drafted? It's usually players that are under 18s, the star midfielders that get taken. One who has gotten a little bit of interest, I haven't put him on the list because he's not necessarily young, but ex-Geelong player Mitch Hardy. From all reports, he's leading the VFL in score assists this season, and he's really taken to a midfield forward role really well. He's been really, really experienced in the midfield and added a lot of vigour and I guess a lot of system to that midfield group at Casey, which ended up finishing in the top 6. They upset Box Hill on the weekend, so that was a very, very good win. But yeah, when he's gone forward, he's shown a lot of craft as well. So yeah, former Geelong player, hopefully gets another opportunity, and I think clubs looking for experienced players could do worse.
He would be he'd be upper 20s,
27.
27, there you go. So yeah, I think he turns 28 in the next month or so.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do wonder about that, but as you say, the the score assists, the natural smarts. I mean, the upside wouldn't be enormous, but it's whether he could be somebody. If you were a club like Richmond, for example, who's got an abundance of kids, to get somebody in there who can do a really solid job for you, particularly when you've got players like Prestia towards the twilight and McIntosh towards the end and those sorts of things, just to get someone in there to help. Take some bodies and be a physical presence for those younger sides.
No, very well summed up. Lane Ward, another one, Box Hill player. He is one who the Hawks rate really, really highly, and he's found a way to largely stay in the team this year, which is really, really impressive. I think until the last couple of weeks where they've had back-to-back losses, they've been the ladder leaders all the way through the season, and his toughness has been really, really impressive. Like Harry Scott, he's a graduate of the Gippsland Power Program in 2023, and they're definitely pushing his case for AFL honours.
Yeah, only turned 19 recently, very lightly built but tough, as you say. I mean, he's putting a little bit of size on. I think he was mid-60s or something in terms of weight in his draft year initially. But yeah, I think his ability to be a physical presence and to show that toughness despite his being marginally undersized is really impressive, and he can certainly get bigger, and he has the right attitude to be a bit of a bull and a ball winner. So he's a guy that I think recruiters would feel is a safe commodity.
Yep. No, that's well summed up. We'll go to 3 tall forwards now: Jonah Camperley, Ryan Ayres, and Will Elliott. We'll start with Jonah Camperley, probably less of a true key position player than the other two, but still has the ability to take a mark inside 50. I watched him against Footscray earlier in the year, and that was a real breakout game of his. He kicked the 5 goals, and it was a really complete performance. Sandringham have struggled in the VFL this year. Footscray ended up finishing on top of the ladder, and they pushed them all the way, really, Sandy. And Jonah Camperley's finishing and tackling and marking was a big part of that. But has some attributes straight out of Old Brighton, first year on a VFL list, quite raw, but certainly there's some attributes that are likeable. Got the chance to train with St Kilda in pre-season as well.
Yeah, has had ties with Sandy and a few other things over the journey, but yeah, he can push up the ground. He gets a bit of it as well, so he can be a fairly versatile forward option. He doesn't just sort of live at home. There's been games where he'll get 16 or 17, 8 or 9 marks, and 4 or 5 score involvements. So he's probably not going to rip games apart, but he can be a serviceable third foil potentially.
Yep. A little bit earlier in his journey is Jonah. So too is Ryan Ayres. Unfortunately, a hamstring injury has ruled him out of the second half of the season, but he was quite close to getting drafted mid-season. He's got the height, and we know that is sometimes a commodity that's tough to get at the AFL draft. But if someone wants to spend some years developing him, there's the opportunity for him to get drafted, and we know he's 20 as opposed to 18, so he's already done some of that development.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, he's not right under the nose of recruiters with a bit of bad luck there, and he's not someone that's going to play 20 games next year at AFL level. But if someone's patient, and there's enough clubs out there that would have a reason to show that level of patience. We spoke again about Richmond before. You look at North Melbourne, who have got some talented forward options that could probably buy some time with somebody like that, with the youth in their group. So, or even, a West Coast Eagles who are going to have to restructure a little bit with Allen and various others. So, yeah, there'll be at least half a dozen clubs, I think, that would have his name on a board.
And then Elliott, I think I'm really interested in what you think of Will Elliott, Darren. He has been at the Northern Bull Ants for the last couple of years, and we know that they're a bit of a success-starved club. He doesn't necessarily get the supply he would get if he was playing at a Footscray or a Box Hill, but has really straightened them up forward, and is probably starting to enter that sweet spot of his career in terms of 22, 23 years old, the former Oakley Chargers captain, who has been to some degree plagued by injury.
Yeah, he's got a bit of he's got a few tricks too. He's sat on some heads over the course of his career, and as you say, a side where, in terms of analysing defensive setups against them, there's not a stack of weapons. So he gets a fair bit of attention, doesn't get a lot of great delivery, doesn't have a lot of support, but he works really hard. He's fairly disciplined. He doesn't lose his cool. He can do it in the air and on the ground. So, I think I would hope that clubs would look at that and think we're not just looking at the top end of the table. There are guys that can handle that adversity really well, who would thrive with better delivery.
Absolutely, yeah, well summed up. A couple of Geelong VFL boys as well, and both of them probably have the capacity to cover the ground really well. So Tobin Murray in particular, former Geelong Falcons boy, he is a really, really good winger, hard runner, and probably has the athleticism and power to suit the modern game. We've mostly seen him on the outside, but also he has shown at times he can go on the inside. And I know, speaking to Geelong VFL coach Mark Corrigan, he's really high on what he's shown at training with his toughness in the contest. It's just been, like we've already spoken about, the AFL boys have to take priority, so he doesn't get that chance to show it. Yeah,
he's been extremely close to the top level, I think, on a number of occasions. So clubs have been prepared to have a look at him. And there's a lot of players that when they are given that chance, eventually they do thrive. You look at, the most obvious example was Podsy Adley, who spent most of his career close to the system, and then once he got in there, was able to thrive. So, there's been enough for a lot of clubs to, invite him down and have a look and put him in those systems. So, just needs somebody to take a punt.
Yep. And Marcus Herbert, probably taken his footy to the next level, but been reasonably consistent across a fairly large amount of time now for the Geelong VFL side. And I think, like we've talked about with a couple, is starting to enter that spot where he's got those 50 games of experience behind him.
We've gone a fair way through without saying basketball background, but he's one that's got one of those. Yep. So, he's got a few tricks and, a bit of a multi-dimensional athlete. So, versatility would be the key for him.
Yeah, yep. No, very well summed up. What we'll do now is we'll have a chat about a few players who got VFL opportunities on the weekend, and I think it was a great weekend for that because there's 3 in particular that really, really shone in for Victorian clubs, and then there were 3 Gold Coast Academy boys who probably played their best games at the level, and then Brisbane's Dan Annable continued on his really strong form, was clearly Brisbane's best midfielder in their draw with Frankston on Sunday. But the 3 boys from Victoria who got the opportunity: Cooper Duff-Tytler debuted for Essendon, Toby Cinema debuted for Casey, a Melbourne NGA prospect, and Kai Fincher debuted for Sandringham in the club's last ever game, aligned with St Kilda, and took out player of the day, Darren.
Yeah, he did. There was a huge St Kilda presence at that game because they had obviously a function to celebrate the union over the time, and so he timed that run beautifully. There was a lot of, given St Kilda had played on the Friday night, there were a lot of their recruiting and list management staff and a lot of the head honchos, so a really good opportunity for him and he stood out alongside some experienced AFL listed players like Carroll, who was in that side, and then some recent draftees. Travalia played in that game and the like, so he's an exciting prospect. We know the Saints have been very vocal on how that system works, but they might be able to benefit from it potentially. And obviously with Cooper, it's that question that we'll probably get to when we talk about one of the sides we're going to look at who's going to have the first pick, as to whether they go tall and look at that project type player. But he looks like he could have an influence as a ruckman who can really cover the ground and potentially drift forward as well.
Just going back to Fincher, I think he's seen as a second-round prospect and did those hopes no harm at all. 24 disposals, trailed only Ethan Williams, who was the vice-captain of the side, and Jack Carroll that you touched on. Cooper Duff-Tytler, I think the good thing that he did on the weekend, kicked the 3 goals too, and I think if he is going to go top 5, as he's long been touted to, we probably need to continue seeing that forward presence in the back end of the season, because we know what he's able to do in the ruck. He's been described as that unicorn, but at 200 centimetres, we need to make sure that he's got the ability to play forward, and doing it at senior level on debut at the VFL, particularly when he's coming off AGSV footy, which isn't the strongest competition, says a lot about what sort of ability he's got. Toby Cinema, 15 disposals, kicked a crucial third quarter goal in that Casey upset win we touched on before over Box Hill. So one for fans of the Melbourne Footy Club to get excited about. He's got a good left foot on him as well. We'll move on to the next part of this podcast, looking at a couple of clubs and their potential list needs and targets. The last 2 clubs that we're going to do today, so we've run through the other 16, so we're up to W in the alphabet, West Coast and the Western Bulldogs. We'll start with West Coast. Darren, like you talked about with Cooper Duff-Tytler, one of the question marks that surrounds them is whether to go tall early in the draft, but also, is it a case of taking best available talent? It probably is. I
think that's probably West Coast's approach is best available, but there are other layers to that. I mean, we know it's been a historically low point season-wise in terms of the fact that, a 1-win campaign outside of the expansion clubs, GWS, and at the time of recording, they've still got a game to play, but outside of GWS in their second season, you got to go back to Fitzroy in their last year to have a side with a 1-win campaign. We know that what's happened to them over the last few years in terms of they win a flag in 2018. They were around the mark for the next couple of years. They sold the farm to sort of stay in contention. It didn't quite work. They lost a lot of draft capital. But if you look at purely their list, so Barras is gone, McGovern's forced to retire, Oscar Allen obviously headed out the door as what was a very bright key position prospect for them. What happens with Harley Reid? The question around whether he gets poached by a Geelong or a Hawthorn, that they clearly would get an enormous draft windfall if that did happen, given his value. And then where does it leave them? I think it's very clear now. Obviously, they misread where they were at with the Kelly scenario. They know that answer now. But I think for West Coast, it's about just casting the net and boosting really every aspect of the game. And they've got access to, as you say, the best ruck prospect in the draft, and probably the best ruck prospect in the draft for a little while. Do they go down that path, or do they look at strengthening their midfield, going for key position players at either end of the ground? But I think for West Coast, it's less specific and more quality. But I'd pose the question to you in regards to when Brisbane had a long period in the doldrums. The biggest issue they had was player retention. Now, there's not going to be a lot of Queenslanders necessarily in the draft for Brisbane, so they had to think a bit laterally. And they would often recruit, they'd have a top-end talent from a particular club, and then they might recruit somebody who was a very good mate of theirs from the same club who they've got a bit of an eye on to get that familiarity and that sort of sense of safety and avoiding the homesickness and that type of thing. So I wonder whether West Coast don't just channel towards WA, but channel towards that type of thing. Start building some connections and make sure that whatever they recruit stays long term, that they can build around.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very good point. I think it's been talked about a little bit tongue in cheek with getting Willem Dersma and hoping that keeps Harley Reid there, but actually looking at that as more of a potential strategy. But also, it's probably worth touching on the fact that they've got Kobe Evans and Wes Wally in their next generation academy. So Kobe Evans is a midfielder and Wes Wally is a small forward. So that strengthens up parts of the ground. But I think it's a sound point that you make, because actually working on a story about Ruben Jimby at the moment, and it's interesting that when he debuted, he had Shannon Hearn there, he had Elliot Yeo there, he had Liam Duggan and Tom Cole that is still there, but he also had Tom Barras. So that's 3 key pillars that are gone. So they probably need to start to establish some continuity and ensure that the young group that they're going to spend so much time developing is going to be developing and playing their best footy at the West Coast Eagles Footy Club.
Yeah, and look, the clearest example of potential homesickness is Harley Reid, who's obviously been every bit a number 1 pick since he went there. You just don't want to have to keep starting again.
Yeah.
So you don't want it to be a case if you put a couple of years into someone, they look really good, they decide they want to go home. Yes, you get some great draft hands, but you're hoping for the same thing again, and you're starting back at that point. So just build a stable core.
Yeah.
They're not going to have the 12 picks or whatever that Richmond had last year to do it quickly, but they'll still be in pretty good shape.
Yep. I think Willem Dersma is the player that they should be targeting.
Absolutely.
I think he suits the next generation of footy really well. He's got that run as a sort of transition midfielder, and he's a really hard worker as well. He's got that versatility, and I think there's been a little bit of unfair talk around, his surname, and has Zane lived up to the hype? Has Xavier lived up to the hype? But the younger brother, I guess you say, is always the best, and I think he's one that from West Coast really, really suits them quite well as well. When looking at some bigger bodied mids that they perhaps already have got, he would complement them quite nicely.
Yep, and I think he's the type of guy that would have an influence straight away. Yep. You think about guys that might play 15 plus in their first season, and just start fast tracking, get 60 games together with a core midfield. It's a really good base.
Yep. We'll move on to the Western Bulldogs now. From my point of view, it's interesting looking at what they need. I think there's 2 clear targets for them, so defenders and small forwards. So from a small forwards point of view, we know Cody Waitman's missed the year with injury, and unfortunately that has kept dragging on, but he'll be back in 2026, fingers crossed, touch wood. But he's not that traditional small forward, and neither is Riley West. They have the ability to take marks off front and centre small forward, so that, yes, we know how reliable Norton and Darcy are, and they're contested marking types, but if it is coming to ground level, if you have someone there who's able to kick some front and centre goals, a la Charlie Cameron, a la someone like we'll talk about some of the players in this draft class, but someone like a Nick Watson or a Jack Inovan, then that's going to make them really, really scary, more than they already are.
Yeah, I mean, the targets in the air are clearly going to be Darcy and Norton and
Croft on the weekends.
That's right. So they're fine in that sense, and the ball's not going to hit the deck a lot, but it's not going to get channeled through some of those smaller guys too much. They're going to have to be at the feet. Those tall guys are going to draw multiple defenders. They're going to create spills. They're going to get those opportunities. And as you say, I mean, Riley West, who's played a bit forward with some effect, is another one who's more of the lead mark player. If you look at, say, Jamie Elliott as the prototype of the lead mark small forward, who's very good overhead for his size, they've got a lot of those types of forwards. So and Waitman, another one of those where he would kick the probably the majority of his goals lead mark. That's one area. In terms of backs, Rory Lobb was thrown back with some effect. Liam Jones, clearly a senior player, but they concede scores. Made the observation, and again, they've got a game to play where they're playing for their season in the final round, but they've got the highest percentage. If they were to miss the 8, they would have the highest percentage ever of a team that missed the finals. Yeah. So they've got no problems scoring, and clearly that indicates that when they lose narrow. Yeah. But when they lose to those, the top end sides. It's Collingwood that's beaten them. It's Geelong. It's Brisbane. It's the Gold Coast in Darwin. Those sorts of matchups. And it's probably just that ability of those better sides to take some things off you that they don't quite have defensively. So, they're definitely a side that would would only be 1 or 2 notches away from challenging for a title. So, yeah, that they would certainly be more specific in their targets than West Coast. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Key position backs, certainly not forwards, and then small crumbing forwards.
Yep. I think a few of those small crumbing forwards in this draft class. So you've got Taylor Byrne, who's really rocketed up boards with his national championships, in particular that last game against Vic Metro, which was so impressive. Tom Matthews has been a little bit out of sight, out of mind, but could be a later selection. Lockie Doverston, if they were to use a higher selection on a small forward and go for that needs basis, given we've talked about how significant it probably is for them to get that. And then also Zane Piker, probably seen as a second round prospect out of South Australia. And we've talked extensively about the fact that just with key defenders this year, there's probably not a whole lot of them in this draft class. Harry Dean, the standout, obviously tied to Carlton. So yeah, maybe the Western Bulldogs will have to think laterally or try and find a diamond in the rough there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think from other clubs which way they could go in a sense, because I mean, if you were to draft a key backman, it might take 3 years.
And that's the thing, they're probably in the window now.
Yeah, that's right. And by then, Jones is retired, Lob's probably gone, or close to it, and then by then you might be running out of chances. Bontempelli, Liberatore, etc., getting older through the middle. So they're best served to go and find one somewhere. But as for who that is from another club, that's the challenge.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe if you look at someone like Lika Lear, linked to the Saints, for example, but that type of player who you might be able to go and grab.
Yep. No, very well summed up. Darren, thanks for coming on and chatting all things AFL draft, particularly with an eye on the VFL this week.
No worries at all. Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Stay tuned to Craft of the Draft on social media for all your AFL draft and talent pathway news, and zerohanger.com.au for everything AFL related.